And what we want to start with today is kind of twofold, but one of the most disregarded but biggest also overlapping topics from the wilderness survival side of things and the violence dynamic self-defense side of things, which is we acknowledge should an unplanned event occur, physical altercation, an attack, a wilderness survival scenario, it's all very well having a framework for everything to work on and say these are the steps we're going to follow, da 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 da, but unless we get over that initial panic and manage the fear, nothing's going to happen. We're just basically going to freeze in place or get caught in a bad decision making cycle. So the two things we really want to kick around for the next few minutes is suppression of panic and managing fear. And I think what we're going to find is we've probably got very, very different approaches to cover the exact same concept.
But one of the things about this, and this is really important in the crossover between self-defense and wilderness survival, it's the exact same problem, but because of the time frame, it has to be handled very differently, or there's different ways to handle it. If you've got a quarter second to get your shit under control, that's way different than if you've got a couple of days.
And I think it's use of that time that's the most significant thing. It's like the classic tactical planning, how much time do you use the time that you've got available?
Yeah.
So in my world, you know, that can be in seconds, sometimes minutes, possibly even hours, and in your world it's in fractions of a second most commonly.
Yeah.
So if we just take a step back from the time frame and look at the overall concept, because that's where we're going to have the huge sort of crossover and similarity, and I think then we can break it down to sort of like individual techniques almost, or more specific kind of tactics or methods. So what are your thoughts on that? Why is panic suppression or fear management even going to be an issue?
You're going to get it done with stress hormones.
Yeah. And adrenalization in both counts quite simply.
Right.
Now, the one thing I'm curious about, I think that's a physical trigger in the self-defense side of things. But is it possibly going to be more of a mental trigger in the wilderness survival side? And in that you finally acknowledge the situation and you get that, I'm lost in the woods, it's dark, I'm cold, I'm injured. So it isn't necessarily a physicality, it's far more a switch in your head.
I got lost once. I gone caving solo, which was my first mistake. But I was really needing to get out of the city. Anyway, there's a place called Pickard Sink. As far as I know, it is the only circular lava tube known. Cool thing about circles, it's impossible to get lost in it. Okay. So I found a tube in tube, which is when you've got a lava tube under another lava tube. It's usually just a small, almost a bubble that float out. It was tiny, so I left my pack. And I crawled through it and I came out in a different section. Turns out I wasn't in the same circular cave. I was in a different cave that just looked the same. And I come out of the bottom of a rock piler. And once I went through the cave, I'll just go around in a circle till I find my pack and hit a wall. And realized that wasn't where I thought it was. And the place I needed to get out was under one of the many, many piles of breakdown on the ground. And I could feel the panic started to, it literally felt like a rat crawling at the back of your neck. And took a couple deep breaths, it's like, and I had this conversation with my brain, and the conversation was, I really want to panic, I know I want to panic, I don't see how panicking will do any good, give you 5 minutes to make a plan, and if I can't make a plan, we'll just run around screaming, putting my hands in the air. And my brain backed off and said, okay, I'll give you 5 minutes to come up with some shit. And it worked out.
Nice.
I
I think most of the sort of rising adrenal responses for me was in rock climbing, where you know you're making the move, and each move is getting progressively more sketchy. The gear's getting more stretched out, and it's that, you know, get some gear in, back climb, or get on some way more solid handholds and footholds, and you feel it. And I used to get this wicked tremor in my legs, you know, the old Elvis leg, which doesn't help the situation. Of course, like when you're on tenuous footholds, the last thing you want to start doing is shaking. And it is that real internal monologue of convincing your own brain, this isn't helping. So going back to the point that I think we both agree it's far more of a mental process, as opposed to that, like, bang, somebody just punched me in the face, whoa, what's going on? Physical altercation type thing. And so that leads you into that time disparity in both, in that if you're in your head, knowing you can have a conversation in your head, that's very rarely split-second type stuff, because obviously it's all going to be like reflex action taking over. So if we just stay in that one, You said in your caving example that you kind of took a couple of deep breaths
Mm-hmm.
and then started the sort of
Yeah.
internal dialogue. And I think for all the experience I've got, breathing is probably one of the most critical aspects of panic suppression, most definitely. Fear management, I'm not too sure about, but I think there's just something about getting your breathing under control, because it will be out of control when you're getting adrenalised, that helps lay out the rest of the options.
Yeah, they have the autogenic warrior breathing, whatever you want to call it, the slow in to a count of 4, hold to a count of 4, out to a count of 4, hold empty for a count of 4. A lot of the things that come up that work really well, but they come up or were discovered or were written out by people that had a different environment than someone who's under attack. If I'm responding to a call, someone yells for backup, I can do my breathing exercise, I can do some calming while I'm approaching. If I'm the one yelling for backup, I can't take 4 slow breaths while someone's trying to stab me in the stomach.
No.
The time doesn't exist. That's one of the, there are a lot of things that work in a certain situation, but they don't work in the situations where we need them most. I couldn't have had that conversation with my brain about, give me time to come up with a plan for 5 minutes. I'm going to let this guy count on me for 5 minutes and come up with a plan and you can panic. It's not going to work for that. The time, it's different. One of the things that's really, really valuable for me, but I do not know if this can be taught. I know it's there. I know it exists in everybody. But all the people I know can do it, learn it through experience, not through any form of training. When you get that adrenaline dump, are rage and fear any different?
I guess we'd like to think they are, but probably not.
But what if it's just that you label it?
Yeah.
You get that dump, and if you call it rage, you're going to fight. And if you call it fear, you're going to curl up.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're at the point where you go, this is just adrenaline, and you're just going to do what you're trained to do. But again, I haven't seen anyone do that with that experience, but it's just a data point. It's the difference. Oh my God, I'm bleeding. Oh my God, I'm bleeding. I'm bleeding.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a level of conditioning with that. The more you can expose yourself to adrenal reaction, the more you first of all recognise it, because of course the first few times it happens, it's just like this kind of whole other person's taking control of your body and you're a puppet almost. And as you start to sort of work with it and acknowledge it and embrace it almost, then you can start to do pretty powerful things with it.
Yeah, but it's one of the things, there are a whole bunch of things we've all experienced that no matter how much we thought about them or planned them, the real thing was completely different. And you're never prepared. You're never prepared to be a father. You can rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. The first time you ask a girl out on a date, you're a bumbling idiot. You can do all the simulations you want, but the first time actually behind a wheel, car, plane, anything, it's not the same. And this is especially critical in fighting because unless you go into a handful of professions, you're only going to have that one shot.
Yeah.
And
that's the key thing, isn't it? You're just not going to get that routine exposure.
Right.
I guess it's where we're fortunate in like the woodland scenario as well, that probably anyone that's been out any amount of times has had that close call, a number of close calls where they thought they were lost but suddenly found the trail, or it got a little bit hairy or sketchy but then it was okay. And you would have got that small sort of adrenaline trickle, or even a significant amount, but then kind of caught it and returned to normal fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any crossover? Do you think getting adrenalised in one arena helps you in another, or it's a very sort of activity specific
my experience is almost
sensation?
No.
I'd agree. I mean, for every close call in the woods I've had, it felt nothing like being in fights.
Right, and
even though I guess the science is like adrenaline is adrenaline, it felt completely different.
Well, and what I think, and this is just speculation, I think it's if you've done this 10 times, it's not that you're used to the adrenaline, your body recognizes you've been here before and doesn't dump as much. You're closer to your comfort zone. So, first serious sparring match, first competition, come really adrenalized, and you get the guys that have been doing it for years and they're taking a nap. They don't need the adrenaline, they know when it needs to come in and how much. Whereas if you get even from one fight to another fight, you could be the absolute best in the world at naming your sport, and you're starting to name your sport and you see a knife in the other guy's hand, you're going to get the full dump. And so I don't think I think that's why the crossover, it's not as big as we think it is. Because your body's unfamiliarity makes it dump more. Not that you got used to the amount that it dumps.
So we can't just say an adrenaline dump or response is one thing. It's measured very much in the quantity that's being dropped into the system.
And
the more unknown and the more life-threatening, I guess,
yeah.
The larger the amount the body's just going to kind of dump in there.
Well, you can get a life-threatening, and I'm not going to use the name because I can't remember the name of the guy that pointed out to me. You can have a life-threatening thing that you do every day, and you don't get adrenaline from it. I don't know how many people are watching this, but people watching some of them drive in traffic every day. You're moving a ton of metal at 70 miles an hour with a whole bunch of other idiots doing the same thing at the same time. You can't tell me that's not life-threatening. But because we do it every day, there's no adrenaline associated with it unless something's unusual. You take that same, you're on a pile of metal going that fast, and you've never run it before, it's a totally different amount of adrenaline. So the things that become routine is saying, you people work in jails, people work in the street, and things that are like, oh my God, that's a day of work. So you can, yeah, and getting inured to one, as long as it stays in that venue, you're fine. If it steps outside that venue, you're a beginner again. Everyone's a white belt in almost everything.
Yeah. So, difficult to replicate in training, and familiarity doesn't necessarily afford you a benefit as soon as you're out of the very specific activity you're familiar with. So like you say, you can be a professional climber, high-end sportsman, and not get adrenalized, even solo climbing, for instance, and yet somebody palms a knife on you in the street, and you're just going to get the full effect. There's no like, oh, I'm used to controlling my adrenaline.
Yes.
So knowing that we're all potentially subject to it at any time, then I think we can get into some of the specifics of what, if anything, can you do to help yourself control yourself almost.
I will say that if you've been in a bunch of situations where you freeze, even if they're very different, then the ability to break out of a freeze crosses over.
Okay.
That's one. You still get the adrenaline jump, but it's like, what do I need to do? I need to do two things.
And that's because your brain's just allowing that acknowledgement that instead of just freezing, it is acceptable to move out of this freeze. We're not going to die right now, so we need to do something.
Your brain goes, I am frozen. Being frozen is bad. What I need to do to break this freeze is two things. Let's do the two things. I'm out of the freeze. And now it's still unfamiliar. You're still under adrenaline. But the breaking the freeze seems to cross because the freeze is the same. If the freeze is the stimulus, not what caused it, you can break the freeze separate from dealing with the adrenaline.
Just on the freeze, you look at a lot of things sort of solo or individually, and you're having to break the freeze.
Yeah.
I know certainly going to a lot of the outdoor pursuits, and it's interesting you said when you went to cave you went solo and that was the first mistake. And a lot of times, especially in the more dangerous outdoor pursuits, we're looking at obviously being in a pair, climbing with a partner or paddling with a buddy or something. One of the things I've noticed is that kind of almost coaching state, where someone will be on a climb and you can really see it's going wrong and they're freaking out and they're basically frozen, and you're becoming that voice that they need to hear in their own head. They potentially don't have the ability in that moment to be their own voice, so you will just kind of not even talk them through, advise them, just get the dialogue going. Now with that I found it's difficult to train. It's almost you get a sensation after a while. Sometimes it's highly desirable to completely change the subject to get their mind off the immediate problem. Other times it's to coach them through the immediate problem. I've had people get proper hairy in boats, and the best thing was to change the subject and just ask like, what were we cooking for dinner that night around the campfire? And they're suddenly like, what? Because it's just taken them out of that. There's the sheer fear of what's happening with going down the rapid, or the fact they've kind of got stuck on a small spur and they've got to get back in the water, whatever the case may be. And yet in climbing, especially because of the fatigue factor, it's that coaching them through the problem, because they just can't hang there that long. And the longer they're hanging on adrenalized muscles, the faster they're going to fatigue. What's your kind of thoughts on that? Obviously you've done a lot of solo activities, but
if it's static, you coach them. If someone is doing...
So if they're not moving...
Right. But if someone's looping, if they're doing the same thing over and over again, where they're getting into a cycle and you know where the cycle is going, those are the ones you have to break out sideways.
Yeah. And typically, in the first instance, that'll be a verbal loop.
Yeah.
Somebody, I mean, I remember the guy that was on the spur and needed to get back in the water, you know, and it's, I've got to get back in there, I've got to get back in there, with, you know, with no intent to get his boat back into the current. And so, yeah, it was just sort of that breaking out. Did I ever tell you about the Wizard of Wig, just out of interest?
No.
No. So this is a fantastic character. A good friend of mine who I climbed a lot with and Special Forces operator had this character known as the Wizard of Wig. And that was his kind of coping mechanism almost. He would just acknowledge the Wizard of Wig was visiting him. And so by sort of personalising it, there was a couple of other characters we had, but for the sake of lack of profanity, I won't use them right now. One was a fairy and her first name began with F as well. So it would be that acknowledgement on a climb or in any particularly bad situation. You know, he'd say, "Oh, the wizard's visiting me." You know, we had the Wizard of Wig, as it comes from wigging out. And that was incredibly powerful, actually. Once he kind of threw that thought out there, so instead of an internal conversation, you almost take it like your invisible friend type thing. You know, you've got the Wizard of Wig sat here. Sorry if this sounds very strange, but it works. And you're sort of almost having that, well, why are you visiting me? Oh, because you really messed up and look at the state you're in. Oh, but I think I can fix it. Oh, I'm not so sure, that's why I'm here. You know, I guess it's more of a manifestation of the Grim Reaper in in some circumstances. Have you ever heard of anything like that? Somebody sort of breaking out and having almost like the imaginary friend conversation?
Yeah, I have. I've heard of it. It's and they're theme songs.
I was going to come to this. Music's incredibly powerful.
There was an article I read years ago where someone had interviewed a whole bunch of outdoor experts and asked, the last time you thought that you were going to die, what was the song that was running through your head? And every single one of them had
a song. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine was Oasis, Wonderwall. And so there's an interesting point. I was going to come to that you use like when you have time, like a breath count or a measured breath system to sort of help out. And
it's one way. I don't do that anymore.
But it's certainly something you're familiar with.
Yeah.
And I found, and again, the song that used to play in my head was this kind of very slow, mellow tempo. And I used to actually sing the song out loud, and that would force you. And I'm not a good singer, so this was a terrible thing for my belaying partner and things. But that would just force you to take on this regulated breathing, because I just found sort of focusing on doing a breath count made me more nervous about the situation, that how adrenalised am I that I'm having to physically number my breathing.
For the fast stuff, when things are happening really bad, really fast, karate guys get into these big debates about what's the right way to breathe. And especially when you get into some of the Okamas with the base white breathing. And they get really weird about it. And one of the grand old men, George Mattson, who's definitely the highest ranked guy in his system in the country, was like, he just really goes, you know, if you can smell the guy you're fighting, you're doing it right. And I'm thinking, that's cool. So the next time I got in a big fight in jail, I sniffed the guy. And my brain went into total predator mode. He wasn't a threat anymore, he was just a piece of meat. And he saw or sensed me sniff him, and he went passive. It was really creepy. But as far as breath control in the moment, that one's pretty powerful.
And that ability to not only, this is assisting with the balance of the adrenalisation, but invoke certain mindsets. Because we're aware, and again, especially from the wilderness side of things, sometimes the best thing is going to be going quite passive, just sitting down, calming down, thinking things through, formulating your plan. You know, and that might be kind of getting the map out, you know, and doing some really quite fine motor stuff. You know, you're setting your compass, you're looking at the features, and it's just gathering information. All the way through to, you know, I'm just trying to think now, I can't remember the mountain I was on, but basically bad weather on a scree slope, and that rock slide started, and it was actually 2 or 3 sort of side steps trying to get up towards the ridgeline, which didn't work, and it then was like the more immediate, safest way is to kind of do a diagonal traversing bound, but to get to a sort of safer patch of ground. But it was that information gathering far more fast, but it was like an uncontrollable slide.
Okay, I got one for you. Question.
You know?
Because this is more when someone's in a situation, in a bad situation, and they're getting inappropriately hyper focused. You've got someone, they're, you know, the imaginary, not, you know, they suddenly pop into the woods with no resources, but you know, car's gone off. They're sitting there, going through their pockets, and they out, and all they got is an eyebrow pencil. It's like, you know, how do I survive with just this eyebrow pencil? And they can't realize it's totally useless.
Mm-hmm.
It has no bearing on their lives whatsoever. But since it's all they have, it's all they can think about. How do you break them out of that?
So, how do they break themselves out is very different from how do you break them out.
Yeah, okay.
Well, let's go with how do you break them out first.
Yeah.
And again, that can just be, the Mark 1 slap, like just the sort of shock factor to get out of it. I think I have to question on that, knowing the sort of peak and trough of the adrenaline cycle. So long as they're not in any danger or doing anything stupid, you can just let it run its course. You know, they're going to sort of peak, and then they're going to sort of fatigue. They're going to go on the back edge and have to sort of come down. So you might just have to kind of let them peak first. And we've all dealt, especially with kids, they have, you know, they start that tantrum, and you know effectively there's no stopping it. It's going to happen, and then they're going to come down the other side, and it's all going to be sobs and hugs. And I think sometimes, that being a very natural cycle, you can just sort of allow it to happen. And certainly when I've been out in the woods, I've seen people with that. They've just got really, normally multi-day scenario, taken a lot in, bottled a lot up, and preventing the release of that is actually the most undesirable thing. Letting them peak, vent, come down the other side is far more healthy and desirable. So I think it's sort of recognising the situation and looking at the risk factor. I think the person focusing on the eyebrow pencil, how is this, you know, related to the circumstance? Well, you either just totally give them something good. Oh, we can sharpen it and use it to chase a pig. Yeah, good, right. And they move on to the next thing, like they've solved the problem of what that thing's for. Or you just highlight, you know, when we get found, then you can do your makeup. Yeah. But until then, let's not worry about it. So again, it's just those kind of psychological ploys and games. How did they break out of it? That's a great question. And I personally think that's got to be getting down to, I think, not only the breathing cycle, because we've highlighted the importance of that, but also sometimes it's desirable to deny senses to allow other senses to play. So I think on that, obviously they're being very visionary focused. It's like there's this, they've just got this big tunnel gone on, and the whole world is condensed down to the eyebrow pencil. And I think sometimes combine the breath control with just removing vision, just close your eyes and smell and listen instead, can just break them out of that loop.
And that's one of the meditations that I learned in psychological first aid. Is you know, whatever calm breathing technique you like to get down to your natural breathing. Then shut your eyes and consciously listen for 5 different sounds. Consciously feel 5 different touches. You know, your clothes, your heartbeat, the wind. And if you're up to it, try to find 5 different smells, which is the hard one. But yeah, it takes yourself out of there. It also grounds you very much in what is actually happening with your senses in that moment.
And on that, this is one of the things we found in the fire department, the power of verbalisation. When we're smoke diving, this is where you're in full breathing apparatus and you go inside a house, and it's one of the least desirable parts of the job. It's hugely exciting, but you know, not without its fear. So when you're going through, one of the things you're most worried about is kind of getting misdirected. And so what you're constantly doing at every sort of turn or every junction is saying what's going on. And actually we found through training in triplicate, and the police use this method as well, I think, in high-speed pursuits, especially to ensure good communication. So they don't start turning left, it's like left, left, left. So it's clear and articulated, but it's also sort of embedded in your mind. And we do the same, and actually you'll have the person on the radio sort of demanding updates. So if you're forgetting to verbalise, because you know, you're just thinking about your heart rate, your breathing, again, your breathing's massively important, because you're aware you have a very limited oxygen supply on your back. And that can be the difference between 9 minutes in a building or 20 minutes in a building, is totally on your breathing rate. And so controlling that is critical, but remembering the verbalization is hard, and having that little voice in your ear prompting, where are you now? Did you turn anywhere? They can overdo it, they can, and that's where the wizard can creep in, that voice in your head can make it worse. Oh, what was that noise? Ah, what was it? You know, so that's where, you know, the artful guy in the smoke diving team is the smoke diving leader on the radio, is just keeping the whole net calm, communications net.
Calm is contagious, just like any other emotion.
And this is fantastic. So I think going right back to the example at the beginning, person focused on makeup applicator, calm is contagious. If you're involving that panic or encouraging that panic, that can be undesirable. If you're projecting that calm, fantastic as well.
What about ritual? Arch, look, reach, pull, check, 6,000, 7,000, check canopy.
I think, you know, for known activities, you know, such as skydiving you mentioned there, that drill is critical and calming and is the base for everything. I think the problem is we're dealing far more in the unknowns. You know, it's like whitewater kayaking, but when does it become survival? Well, when all that's gone wrong. So suddenly you're stepping out of the activity to the survival. That's why I like the framework, because it gives you something to adhere to, like an immediate action drill almost. Now I'm thinking about this thing, this thing, this thing. But I think because of the random and overwhelming nature of it, I've never come across in sort of survival literature, survival practice or survival experience where that's benefited anyone, other than a known drill of, you know, check canopy, canopy fails to inflate, ditch canopy, pull reserve. Alright, that's like the ultimate survival scenario, because if you didn't follow that drill then you were hitting the ground at terminal velocity. But that's been sort of factored into that activity as a known hazard, almost.
Yeah, because I find for fighting, I don't like fighting rituals, but immediate action. You know, tackle rack, and you don't think about it.
Yeah.
So, you're right, I think just the stuff that's incredibly simple.
And I think let's look to conclude on that point. That's it. First of all, there is no one answer. It's kind of knowing the individual, knowing yourself, and some people will respond incredibly well and other people will respond incredibly badly. We highlighted right at the beginning that conceptually there's massive overlap in what we're looking at, but specific sort of tactics and techniques vary purely because of the time compression. You're dealing in the fractions of a second. I'm dealing more often than not in the seconds going into minutes, because especially if you're lost in the woods, the immediate threat is getting more lost, which is far less problematic than continuing to receive damage from somebody attacking you. So you can just actually take that time to sit down, almost do the sense meditation that you described, which is a really nice one actually. Again, with the verbalization, if you find that helps, and then kind of get to that place, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm doing, now I'm going to formulate my plan and go from there. I think what would be nice to finish on is, what do we feel are any practices that people can do? Is there any you can think of? I mean,
there's one I've always advocated, which is do the things you don't like to do without hesitation. Get that habit. And the other thing is, whatever you're doing for self-defense, for martial arts, understand the difference between training and conditioning. You can condition yourself to do things. This isn't, you know, sit-up conditioning. This is stimulus response conditioning. You know, I get hit, I hit back, and then you figure out what's going on. Instead of I get hit, oh my God, what's happening? And if that's just a reflex, then that can buy you time to get past the fear.
Good. One from my perspective, always embracing the get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I guess it segues nicely with you, like, you know, getting things done, is when it's safe to do so and you're out, put yourself through some discomfort. No matter how short term. I mean, you know, I look at the weather. We're in Massachusetts now in the fall. It's not fantastically warm. It's quite sort of chilly. Just be out, and as you finish your walk, you know, strip down to your base layer. Allow yourself 5-10 minutes to get cold, but realise you can still function with that. It isn't this overwhelmingly scary thing it's always made out to be. There's massively over fearful connotations in the outdoors marketplace now. Being cold is undesirable, but you can typically go much further than you think and still function perfectly adequately if you allow yourself. And I mentioned this in people clothing dress states. Dress for how you actually feel instead of how you think you're going to feel. when you look at the weather in the morning, whatever the case may be. And I think just sometimes pushing those out of your comfort boundaries makes it far less intimidating when you're taking out of those boundaries inadvertently or not by your own choice.
And on the last road trip, you had that group of 6 who opted to do the 2-day fast. Go without food. It was miserably cold. 2 days without food. And those of us that had done it before, it was just 2 days without food. It wasn't a big deal. But the ones who had never done it before, who had never been hungry before, were freaking out.
Yeah.
They were obsessing, and they were...
And in a short time. This wasn't even a day and a half in. 3-4 hours without eating, which is a normal time most people go and pick 3 meals. Because they knew they weren't eating, suddenly everything became a real big issue.
Yeah, and they were, you know... I can't believe that they were actually getting sluggish. I think they thought they were supposed to.
Yes, and that's the danger. The belief that this is how I should be acting and feeling, and therefore they do. It's like that self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
Oh, I must be feeling low on energy. Don't I feel crap? I don't want to finish my shelter now. Instead of, it doesn't matter how I feel, my shelter's important because I've got to sleep tonight.
Yeah.
So, easy to work with those things. Good. So, this was the first campfire chat. Mine is Campfire. The next one hopefully is going to have a campfire. And I think when we discussed this a little bit earlier, we felt there was a natural segue now. There was a sort of point to go to from the suppression of panic and management of fear. And we'll let you guys know what that's going to be on the next one.
Cool.
Rory, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Toby. Always fun to hang out.
Indeed. Should we turn the heating up now so it's less outdoors and wilderness in here?
Bye, everybody.
See you guys.